Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The wind had been howling like a banshee all evening, rattling the old windows of my little bungalow. I'd lived in this neighborhood for going on 15 years, and I'd seen my share of storms, but this one felt different, angrier somehow. I was curled up on the sofa with a book I'd read a dozen times before. The kind of story that feels like an old friend when the first flicker happened. The lights stuttered, dimmed, then sprang back to life, only to die completely a moment later with a resigned sigh from the refrigerator. Plunged into a sudden, heavy darkness. I sat there for a moment, book still in my lap, the silence of the house pressing in on me. It wasn't just dark. It was that thick, inky black that swallows sounds and makes you feel like you're the only person left in the world. My first thought, as always in these situations, was flashlights. I knew I had one in the kitchen drawer, the big clunky yellow one, and probably a couple of smaller ones scattered about. I fumbled for my phone, its screen a welcome if small beacon in the oppressive dark. 73% battery. Good. I used its light to navigate my way to the kitchen, my footsteps echoing a little too loudly in the sudden quiet. The drawer screeched in protest as I pulled it open. Must remember to oil that. There it was, the trusty yellow flashlight. I clicked it on, and a beam of slightly wobbly light cut through the black. Better. Outside, the storm raged on. Rain lashed against the glass, and the wind moaned around the eaves. I made my way to the front window, peering out through the deluge. The entire street was out. Not a single light glowed from any of my neighbors' homes. It was a proper blackout. My gaze drifted across the street to William's house. William Peterson. He'd lived there even longer than I had. A quiet man, kept to himself mostly. We exchanged pleasantries, of course. A nod when he was mowing his lawn, a wave if we passed in our cars. He was a widower, I knew that much. Lost his wife, Martha, a few years before I moved in. Sometimes I'd see him tending her rose bushes in the front yard with a tenderness that always tugged at my heart a little. He was a good 10 years older than me, I reckoned, maybe more. With a kind, weathered face and eyes that seemed to hold a quiet sadness. I wondered if he was all right over there, all alone in that big house. The thought was fleeting, quickly followed by my own more pressing concerns. I needed to find candles, check the landline, though who knew if that would even work, and maybe dig out the battery-powered radio to see if there was any news on how widespread the outage was. I found a couple of emergency candles in the pantry, the kind that promised to burn for hours, and set one up on the coffee table, its small flame casting dancing shadows on the walls. It was a meager defense against the darkness, but it was something. The silence, though, was the hardest part. Usually my evenings were filled with the hum of the television or music, the small background noises of life. Now, there was only the storm and the frantic thumping of my own heart, which seemed to be a little louder than usual. I made a cup of tea on the gas stove. Thank goodness for that. The hiss of the flame and the whistle of the kettle, strangely comforting. As I sat sipping the hot tea, the candlelight flickering, I couldn't shake the image of William's dark house. He was a capable man, I was sure, but the thought of him sitting over there alone, perhaps with no company but the storm, felt bleak. We weren't friends, not really, just neighbors. But in a situation like this, didn't those distinctions blur a little? I was alone too, after all. My kids were grown and lived states away. And my ex-husband, well, he was a chapter I'd closed a long time ago. Loneliness was a familiar companion, but tonight it felt sharper, more acute in the encompassing darkness. I told myself it was just the storm, the sudden disruption to routine. But a small, persistent voice whispered that perhaps it was something more. After another hour, the wind hadn't lessened, and the rain was still coming down in sheets. The candle was burning low. I found another, lit it from the first, and then, on an impulse I didn't fully understand, I picked up the big yellow flashlight, took a deep breath, and headed for the door. I just wanted to make sure he was okay. A quick check, that's all. The wind nearly snatched the door from my hand as I pulled it open. The rain was cold, stinging my face as I stepped onto the porch. Shielding the flashlight beam with my hand as best I could, I navigated the slick porch steps and started across my soggy lawn towards William's house. The short distance felt like miles in the roaring dark. Branches thrashed above me, and I could hear the angry gush of water in the gutters. Reaching his porch was a relief. I hesitated for a moment, raindrops dripping from my hair, wondering if this was a crazy idea. What if he was asleep? What if he thought I was some kind of busybody? But the image of him alone in that dark house pushed me forward. I raised my hand and knocked, the sound swallowed almost immediately by the storm. I knocked again, louder this time. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a faint flicker of light through his front window, moving closer. The door creaked open a few inches, and William peered out, a lantern held high, its warm glow illuminating his surprised face. "Barbara?" he said, his voice a little rough, but kind. "Is everything all right?" He looked tired, his silver hair slightly disheveled, but his eyes, when they met mine, were clear and steady. Relief washed over me, so strong it almost buckled my knees. He was okay. "Yes, I just wanted to check on you, William," I stammered, feeling a little foolish now. "With the power out and this awful storm, to make sure you were all right." A small smile touched his lips, crinkling the corners of his eyes. "Well, that's mighty thoughtful of you, Barbara. Mighty thoughtful. I'm managing. Come in out of this weather. You'll catch your death." He opened the door wider, and I stepped inside, bringing the scent of rain and wet earth with me into the quiet warmth of his home. The air inside was still, smelling faintly of old books and pipe tobacco, a scent I hadn't realized I associated with him until that moment. His living room was lit by 2 oil lanterns, casting a soft, golden glow that felt incredibly welcoming after the chaotic darkness outside. It was an old-fashioned room, filled with dark wood furniture, bookshelves crammed with books, and framed photographs on every surface. It felt like a room that had seen a lot of living. "Thank you, William," I said, shaking off some of the rainwater. "I didn't mean to intrude." "Nonsense," he replied, closing the door and shutting out the storm's fury. "It's good to have a bit of company, to tell you the truth. Nasty night like this." He gestured towards an armchair. "Please sit. Can I get you something? A hot drink, perhaps? I've got water heating on the gas stove for tea." His offer was simple, genuine, and suddenly, sitting in his warm, lamplit living room, the idea of sharing a cup of tea with this quiet man I barely knew felt like the most natural thing in the world. The initial awkwardness I'd felt on his porch began to dissipate, replaced by a sense of unexpected calm. Maybe this blackout wouldn't be so bad after all. "Tea sounds wonderful, William. Thank you," I said, sinking into the comfortable, slightly worn armchair. It felt like it molded itself to me, a hug in furniture form. He nodded and headed towards what I presumed was the kitchen, the lantern in his hand casting long, dancing shadows that made the familiar shapes of furniture seem mysterious and new. I looked around the room more closely. There were so many photographs. Pictures of a smiling woman with kind eyes. Martha, I assumed. Pictures of children, then grandchildren. A whole life spread out on these surfaces. It was a home in every sense of the word, a place filled with memories. My own home, neat and tidy as it was, sometimes felt a little sterile in comparison. Especially now that it was just me. The silence from the kitchen was companionable, punctuated by the occasional clink of a cup or the hiss of the gas flame. The storm outside still raged, a constant, dull roar, But in here, with the lanterns glowing and the promise of tea, it felt far away, its power to intimidate lessened. I realized I hadn't felt this peaceful in a long time. Just sitting, waiting, with no television blaring, no phone buzzing, no endless to-do list scrolling through my mind. Just the quiet and the anticipation of a simple, shared moment. William returned a few minutes later, carrying a tray with 2 steaming mugs, a small plate of biscuits, and his lantern. He set it down on the sturdy coffee table between us. "Earl Grey," he said. "Hope that's all right." "Perfect," I smiled. He handed me a mug, his fingers brushing mine ever so slightly. A small, inconsequential touch, yet it sent a little shiver through me. Not unpleasant, just noticeable. We sat in comfortable silence for a few moments, sipping our tea. The biscuits were ginger snaps, my favorite. A coincidence, surely, but it made me smile. "These are lovely, William," I said, after taking a bite. "Martha's recipe," he said softly, a wistful look in his eyes as he stared into the flame of the lantern. "She made the best ginger snaps." My heart ached a little for him then. To speak of her in the present tense, then correct to the past, it was a familiar pain. That little hitch in the conversation when you talk about someone you've lost. "I'm sure she did," I said gently. "The roses she planted out front are beautiful. You take such good care of them." He looked up, a flicker of surprise, then pleasure, on his face. "You noticed?" "Of course," I said. "They're hard to miss, especially that deep red one near the porch." He smiled then, a genuine warm smile that reached his eyes and seemed to light him up from the inside. "That was her favorite, a Mr. Lincoln." We talked then, easily, more than we had in all the years we'd been neighbors. We talked about the storm, about other blackouts we remembered, about the neighborhood and how it had changed. He asked about my children, and I told him about my son in California and my daughter in New York, about my grandbabies, showing him pictures on my phone until I remembered the battery and quickly put it away. He listened intently, asking questions, genuinely interested. He told me a little about his own life, about his career as an engineer before he retired, about his woodworking hobby. He gestured to a beautifully crafted bookshelf in the corner. "Made that one myself," he said, a note of quiet pride in his voice. "It's stunning, William," I said, and I meant it. The craftsmanship was evident, even in the dim light. As we talked, I found myself watching him, really watching him for the first time. I saw the intelligence in his eyes, the humor that crinkled their corners, the fundamental kindness that seemed to radiate from him. He wasn't just the quiet old man from across the street anymore. He was William, a person with a history, with passions, with a gentle strength that was deeply appealing. The hours passed by without us noticing. The candles I'd left burning in my own house had probably long since guttered out. But here, in the warm glow of William's lanterns, with the storm a distant rumble, I felt a sense of connection I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't romantic, not in the way people usually mean. It was something quieter, deeper, a recognition. Two souls finding a little bit of light in the darkness, both literal and metaphorical. The conversation eventually lulled, a comfortable quiet settling between us again. The tea was long gone, the plate of biscuits empty. I glanced at the grandfather clock in the hall. Its hands, visible in the spill of light from the living room, pointed to well past midnight. "Oh my goodness," I said, surprised. "Look at the time. I should let you get some rest, William, and I should try to get some myself." He looked a little disappointed, I thought. Or maybe I was just projecting my own reluctance to end the evening. "Yes, I suppose you're right," he said slowly. "Time does fly when you're, well, when you're not sitting alone in the dark. His honesty was disarming. It does, doesn't it? I agreed softly. Thank you for the tea, William, and for the company. The pleasure was all mine, Barbara, he said, his gaze steady on mine. Thank you for checking on an old neighbor. It meant more than you know. He got to his feet as I did and walked me to the door, his lantern held high again. The wind had died down considerably, and though the rain still fell, it was softer now, a gentle drumming on the roof. The world outside was still profoundly dark, but it didn't seem as threatening anymore. As I stood on his porch, ready to brave the short walk home, he did something unexpected. He reached out, not to shake my hand, but to gently touch my arm. Barbara, he began, his voice a little hesitant. This evening, it's been a long time since I've just talked with someone like this, since Martha. He didn't finish the sentence, didn't need to. I understood. I felt a powerful wave of empathy for him, for the loneliness he must have carried. For me too, William, I confessed quietly. It's been nice, really nice. His eyes searched mine for a moment, and I saw a flicker of something there, something deep and vulnerable that resonated with a similar feeling deep inside me. It wasn't just about passing time during a blackout. Something else had happened here tonight, in the quiet of his home, surrounded by the memories of his life. A connection had been forged, tentative yet surprisingly strong. He gave my arm a light squeeze. Get home safe now. And Barbara? I paused, looking back. Yes? Perhaps, he said, a hopeful note in his voice. We don't need to wait for another blackout to share a cup of tea. My heart did a little flutter. It was a simple invitation, yet it felt significant. I'd like that very much, William, I replied, a genuine smile spreading across my face. I really would. With a final nod, I turned and hurried back across the wet grass to my own dark house, the beam of my flashlight cutting a path ahead. But this time, the darkness didn't feel quite so empty. It was as if a small, warm light had been kindled inside me, a light that had nothing to do with electricity and everything to do with an unexpected connection on a stormy night. I got inside, and my house felt colder, emptier than his had. I found new candles, lit them, but the glow wasn't the same. I kept thinking about William, about the comfortable silence, the easy conversation, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. I realized I hadn't just checked on a neighbor. I had found a friend, or at least the beginning of one. And that thought, that tiny spark of possibility, was more comforting than any flashlight. The next morning, the power was still out. The gray light of a rainy dawn filtered through the windows, making my living room look drab and a little sad. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean, but still subdued. My first thought was of William. I wondered how he'd slept, if his house felt as empty to him this morning as mine did to me. I made myself some more tea on the gas stove and ate a piece of toast, all the while replaying our conversation from the night before. It felt strangely dreamlike now in the light of day. Had it really been so easy to talk to him? Had I really shared so much about my own life? The intimacy of the lantern-lit room, the shared vulnerability of the blackout, had created a space where walls came down. I found myself hoping that the connection we'd made wouldn't vanish with the return of electricity and the normalcy of daytime. As I was washing my breakfast dishes, I heard a faint tapping sound. Not at my door, but from outside. Curious, I went to the window and peered out. It was William. He was over by my large oak tree at the edge of the yard, the one that always dropped massive branches in a storm. And sure enough, a very large limb, almost a small tree in itself, had cracked and was hanging precariously, weighed down by the rain-soaked leaves. It looked like it could come crashing down onto my fence, or worse, my shed, at any moment. William was examining it, tapping the trunk of the main tree with a thoughtful expression. Before I could even think to call out, he disappeared back towards his house. A few minutes later, he re-emerged, pulling a sturdy-looking ladder from his garage and carrying a coil of thick rope and a small handsaw. My heart leaped into my throat. He wasn't planning on tackling that himself, was he? He was spry for his age, but that branch was a menace. I threw on my raincoat and boots and hurried outside. "William," I called out as I approached. "What are you doing? That looks dangerous." He turned, a calm, reassuring smile on his face. "Morning, Barbara. Just noticed this old branch decided it had enough of the storm. Thought I'd see if I could secure it a bit before it does any real damage. Don't you worry, I'm being careful." Careful? He was positioning the ladder against the slippery, wet trunk of the oak. "William, please," I said, my voice edged with anxiety. "Maybe we should call someone, the city or a tree service. That's too big for one person." He paused, one foot on the first rung of the ladder, and looked at me. "By the time they get here, with all the damage around town, it might be too late. And I've handled worse than this in my day. Believe me." He winked, but it didn't entirely ease my concern. "Besides," he added, his voice softer, "neighbors help each other, don't they? Especially after sharing tea and ginger snaps." His words and the warm look in his eyes reminded me of the connection from the night before. He wasn't just being reckless. He was being neighborly, kind. But that didn't make the branch any less dangerous. "At least let me help," I insisted. "I can steady the ladder, or call for help if you need it." He considered this for a moment. "All right," he conceded. "You can be my ground crew. Make sure no one wanders underneath, and keep an eye on that top section. If it starts to shift too much, give a holler." So for the next hour, that's what I did. I stood at the base of the ladder, my hands gripping the wet aluminum, my eyes fixed on William as he slowly, methodically climbed. He moved with a surprising agility, testing each hold before putting his weight on it. He secured the rope around a higher, sturdier limb, then looped it around the cracked branch, creating a makeshift support. Then, with careful, precise movements, he began to saw at the base of the fractured limb. It was nerve-wracking to watch. Every creak of the wood, every shift in his weight sent a jolt of fear through me. The rain had stopped, but the leaves dripped water down onto him, and the ground beneath us was soft and muddy. I found myself holding my breath, muttering little prayers under my breath. He didn't rush. He worked with a focused calm that was, in its own way, reassuring. He clearly knew what he was doing. Finally, with a loud crack, the main part of the heavy branch broke free from the section he was cutting. But instead of crashing down, it swung gently, held by the rope he'd so cleverly rigged, coming to rest against the main trunk. He then carefully sawed through the remaining connection, and the large limb thudded safely to the ground, away from the fence and the shed. William descended the ladder, a little breathless, his face damp with sweat and rain, but with a look of quiet satisfaction. "There," he said, wiping his brow with the back of his hand. "That should hold it from doing any mischief until you can get someone to haul it away properly." I let out a shaky breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "William," I said, my voice trembling slightly, "you were amazing, but you scared me half to death." He chuckled, a warm, rumbling sound. "Sorry about that, didn't mean to frighten you, but I couldn't just leave it hanging there, knowing it could cause you trouble." He looked at the fallen limb, then back at me, his expression earnest. "It's what neighbors do, Barbara." And in that moment, looking at him standing there, a little muddy, a little tired, but with that unwavering kindness in his eyes, something inside me shifted. This quiet, unassuming man, my neighbor, had not only shared his warmth and company during the lonely hours of the blackout, but had then, without a second thought, risked his own well-being to help me, to protect my home. It wasn't just about a cup of tea anymore, or a shared hour of conversation. It was about a depth of character, a selfless generosity that I hadn't encountered in a very long time. It shook me, not in a frightening way, but in a way that reached down to the very core of my being, stirring emotions I thought had long since gone dormant. It was a profound sense of gratitude, yes, but also admiration and a surprising, burgeoning affection. This, I realized, was what he had meant last night. This was connection. This was what it felt like to not be quite so alone in the world. The phrase shook me to the core, echoed in my mind, not as a premonition of disaster, but as a description of this sudden, powerful wave of emotion. My neighbor, William Peterson, had just shown me what true neighborliness, what true human kindness looked like. And it was more beautiful and moving than I could ever have imagined. The lights flickered back on later that afternoon with a suddenness that made me jump. The refrigerator hummed back to life, the digital clock on the microwave blinked 12 o'clock, and just like that, the blackout was over. The ordinary sounds of my home returned, chasing away the last vestiges of the enforced quiet. It should have been a relief, a return to normalcy. And in some ways, it was. But as I went around resetting clocks and checking appliances, I felt a strange sense of something lost. The unique intimacy of the darkened hours, the shared vulnerability, it all seemed to recede with the returning light. I worried, for a moment, that the connection I'd felt with William, the easy conversation and the deeper understanding, might fade too, like a dream upon waking. Later that day, I saw him in his yard, clearing away some smaller debris the storm had scattered. I hesitated for only a second before walking over. The sun was trying to break through the clouds, casting a watery light on everything. "William," I called out. He straightened up, a smile lighting his face when he saw me. It was the same warm smile from the night before, and my earlier fears began to melt away. "Barbara, good to see the power back on, eh?" "It is," I agreed. "Listen, I wanted to thank you again, properly, for this morning, for the branch. You really didn't have to do that." He waved a dismissive hand, though his eyes were kind. "Nonsense. I was glad to help. Besides," he added, with a twinkle in his eye, "I figured after all that excitement, you might be in need of another cup of tea sometime soon. And perhaps some more of Martha's ginger snaps. I found the recipe." My heart swelled. The invitation was clear, and the mention of his late wife's recipe felt like a quiet offering of trust, a sharing of something precious. "William," I said, my voice softer than I intended, "I would like that more than I can say." We stood there for a moment, a comfortable silence between us, the kind we'd discovered during the blackout. The world was back to normal, the electricity flowing, the sounds of the neighborhood resuming. But something had fundamentally changed. The space between our houses, once just a stretch of lawn and sidewalk, now felt bridged by something stronger, something more meaningful. The blackout had been an unexpected interruption, a temporary plunge into darkness. But in that darkness, something precious had been illuminated. A friendship, perhaps even more, a connection that had, indeed, shaken me to the core, not with fear, but with the surprising, profound realization of how much warmth and kindness could be found right across the street, in the heart of a quiet neighbor. I learned that night, and in the days that followed, that vulnerability isn't a weakness, but a doorway, that reaching out even in uncertainty can lead to unexpected gifts. William and I did have that cup of tea, and many more after that. We shared stories, laughter, and sometimes quiet companionship. The rose bushes Martha planted continued to bloom, a vibrant splash of color between our homes, and I often found myself thinking of her, grateful for the legacy of love she'd left behind, a legacy that, in an unexpected way, had helped bring two lonely people together. The blackout was a temporary event, but its effects on my life, on my heart, were lasting. It taught me to see beyond the surface, to appreciate the quiet strength and deep kindness in others, and to recognize the profound beauty of human connection, especially when it arrives in the most unexpected of circumstances. And that, I can tell you, is a story worth sharing,